Anyone who believes in indefinite growth on a physically finite planet is either mad or an economist.
We don't want to focus politics on a notion that involves the rejection of principles around which a large majority of our fellow citizens organize their lives.
We are not as endlessly manipulable and as predictable as you would think.
Power, say the political scientists, is the ability to get things done. That's the point of it. That's why politicians and parties compete for power and to get into power, because when you win power, you have in your hands that magic that enables you to get things done. And that's why we have this traditional view in Britain that governments should be strong, because they then have the power they need to get things done. That's the excuse for preserving a perverse election system, because for whatever its faults, it produces strong governments that then have the power they need. That's why there is this traditional view that Parliament should be weak and essentially serve to shore up the government, because that makes government strong and hence enables them to get things done. Well, that view is the one I will suggest is a fundamental misunderstanding about the nature of power. And that misunderstanding about the nature of power is at the heart of the terrible predicament of misrule that has befallen Britain. So no, I say, power is not the ability to get things done. And one man who found that out was Charles I. And not only because he had his head cut off, but even before that he was a powerful king, but he, from his experience, observed that, quote, "There is more to the doing than bidding it be done." Power is at play when governors are up against others. The governor is the one who wants something done, and the others are those he depends on affecting to make that happen. So there are two types of power then: the power of governors over others and the power of others over governors. Power sits on both sides of the exchange and is not what governors bring to bear on others, but something that both sides bring to bear on each other. Governing, then, is not a matter of getting things done. It is always a matter of getting others to get things done. Always, others intervene. That gives them power. And the misunderstanding that I'm speaking about is to not fully grasp the powerful intervening agency of others. Now, the reason power is not the ability to get things done is that the distance from power to done is long, and that the space between the two is twisted and full of impediments on the governor that gives others power. The governor has the right to make decisions which others are supposed to act on, but again, there's more to the doing than bidding it be done. There's more to it for three reasons. First, political decisions produce only inputs into getting things done. A government may, for example, increase the defense budget, but that still leaves open the question of what use the military will make of those additional means. Second, if things are eventually to happen, the decisions that start the process must be well made and the right ones. That depends on how good the decision makers are, both on how competent they are individually and on how well they collaborate, such as by avoiding infighting, fortress mentality, or groupthink. The power of office is a certificate to be the decision maker, but no more than a driving license says how good a driver the holder is, does power say how good a getter-done the decision maker is. It also depends, and crucially, on procedure. If the decision-making procedure is a mess, what comes out of it will be a mess. In fact, explains Katrin Schultz in a very fine book on what she calls wrongology. In decision-making, certainly political decision-making, things will go wrong if there are not orderly procedures in place to prevent it. And thirdly, inputs need to be processed further into outcomes. As power leads to inputs through decisions, inputs lead to outcomes through implementation. Effective implementation depends on administrative order, that administrators get the job done that is put to them, and on a culture of compliance in the population, so that underlings have enough trust in and confidence in their leaders to more or less do as they are told. In this long process, the power of the governor sits at the start and things happening at the end. And whether the governor has much or little power, what comes out at the end may be what he has intended, something else, something that doesn't work, something better, or nothing. Now, the power of others sit in the governor's dependency on the other for getting his decision pushed through to things happening at the end of the process. A minister, for example, is dependent both on his officials doing what he puts to them and on people throughout the country complying. All these others have the power to go along with their minister or to subvert, disregard, work to rule, drag their feet, turn their backs, or refuse. And those the governor really depends on have as much power over him as he has over them. That's why, for example, the week before the Allied invasion of Iraq in 2003, the commander of the British forces, Admiral, later Lord Boyce, was able to demand an assurance from the Prime Minister that the war would be legal in international law. Behind that demand was a threat of not obeying the war order, and the Prime Minister was forced to give his commander, in writing, the assurance he demanded. So governors and others are up against each other. The governor can either command or he can persuade. The more power he can lean on, the more he can command. The more the power of others, the more he must rely on persuasion. Almost always, there are counterpowers, and once we grasp the powerful intervening agency of others, we see that governance is mainly a business of persuasion. Commanding is either impossible or counterproductive, and a good leader is one who knows the art of persuasion. Now, what makes people accept persuasion is not power, but authority. A governor with authority can persuade reluctant others to go along with his wishes, or even make them think and believe that what he wants of them is really what they want too. And the authority of a governor is in the eyes of others, just as beauty is in the eyes of the beholder. And when underlings see that spark of authority, it works wonders. If servants acknowledge their superiors as their lords, observed or said the observant Machiavelli, they bear natural affection for them. Authority is contained in the willingness of others to listen and be persuaded. No governor has any other authority than that which he is able to extract from others. Authority enables governors to get others to do for them, but at the same time, the governor is at the mercy of those same others for the authority he needs to lead them. The authority of a leader depends on his ability to trap reluctant others into seeing him as someone who deserves obedience. Authority, then, although appearing to belong to the governor, is really in the gift of those he wants to govern. The ultimate power of others, then, is their ability to deny the governor the authority he needs to be able to affect them. That kind of power, explained President Václav Havel of the Czech Republic, who, while still a dissident, made his great contribution to the theory of power in what he called the power of the powerless. The powerless may not be able to oppose visibly, but as long as the governor is in any way dependent on them, even they can subvert. Governing then is a power business, obviously, but never only a power business. It is also and always and mainly a people business. Recently, Anthony King and Ira Crew have published a book about the blunders of our governments, a book that shows that the going wrong is not the domain of any single government, but it is systemic. There are many reasons for this. Obviously, the blame for bad law must fall on Parliament, and in particular on the hapless House of Commons. That puts the stamp of law on just about any rubbish that the government puts before it. That's my argument about procedure. We don't have proper lawmaking procedures in this country, and the outcome is as inevitable. But for now, I want to hone in on the misunderstanding about the nature of power. This misunderstanding is to overestimate what power can give you and to underestimate the degree to which governance is a people business. So let me take a couple of examples, and the first one being the bedroom tax, which is now coming in. Set aside whether or not it is well-intentioned. That's not what I want to discuss. This is a policy that is so badly designed that anyone with half an eye in his head can see that it will fail. It's tragic, by the way, that the relevant civil servants have not been able to prevent it, but probably they are so demoralized or depowered that they are content to see the government make a fool of itself. It's doomed to failure for two reasons. First, it puts an unbearable burden on the officials and social workers who are going to implement it. They are going to have to snoop around into people's homes and see what's under their duvets. They are going to hate the job. And when you have an army of officials who hate what they are told to do, they do not do it well. Most likely, they are going to help dependents to cheat on the policy. Secondly, it puts a terrible burden of compliance on dependents. The afflicted are supposed to move or pay a penalty. Most of them will have nowhere to move, and most of them cannot afford to pay. They will be tempted, forced to cheating, because rules have been imposed upon them which they will be unable to obey. A policy with little or no effect that, as a byproduct, creates unnecessary criminality. Now, this is a policy that relies entirely on command, both over officials and clients, and that is built on a disregard of the inescapable fact that a policy cannot work unless the relevant others are willing and able to implement it. Governments cannot get done anything they want just because they have power. They cannot do more than they are able to persuade others to go along with. It is no good resorting to command because commands don't work up against the powerful intervening agency of others. This policy and its failure is symptomatic of a relentless restructuring of welfare in this country over the years, which is one long, sad list of reforms on top of reforms that don't work. And for a second example, let me take the National Health Service. Now, we have in this country the best health service anywhere in the world, and the most appreciated one. Yet all we are hearing these days is about problems and crisis. Often, we are told that it is underfunded, but that is not the case. The NHS is awash with money. During the last government, by 2007, 2008, the NHS budget was lifted to an unprecedented level from about 5 to about 7 or 8% of national income. The NHS has never had more money to work with than it has now. However, during the period of increased funding, there was also a collapse, and that's not too strong a word, of productivity in the NHS. We know that because it has been measured. The NHS is a big corporation, big enough to be observable in national accounts, and those accounts show that while more money was going in, less output was coming out per pound. It's been analyzed, this data has been analyzed by the excellent Institute for Fiscal Studies, and is crystal clear. So why did productivity collapse as more money went in? Well, there were two reasons for that. One reason for the excellence of the NHS is that it has been not only good, but very cheap. It has been cheap because it has worked under very strict budget discipline. When the new money went in, it went in too quickly and with too much careless political spin. And the result was that budget discipline broke down throughout the system. For example, 4 out of every 10 pounds of new money was siphoned off in a pay bonanza for existing staff. And the second reason was that those working in the NHS were subjected to a dictatorship of rules, targets, form filling, and box ticking. And all this was a conspicuous display from above of a lack of confidence in NHS workers. And those workers reacted, as workers do in such circumstances, by silent revolt. Others, I have said, have the power to subvert, to disregard, to work to rule, to drag their feet, turn their backs, refuse. And that's exactly what happened in the NHS. As a result, very little of what went into the NHS came as inputs on one side, came out again as additional outputs. This is measured also and is well known. No doubt the NHS needed more investment, and the British people were happy to pay it. But the way it was done was a disaster, and counts, in my opinion, as one of the great tragedies in British public policy. We see the legacy now in the litany of complaints over how a brilliant service for the British people is underperforming and meeting with dissatisfaction. It is obvious to me that the explanation was an overestimation of power and a neglect of governance as a people business. What the NHS is a gigantic organization of people. If it is to perform, its people must do it. If they are not encouraged and persuaded, they won't. If they are commanded and pushed around, they will revolt. No government, however powerful, can get more out of the NHS than it is able to animate the people who work in it to put their backs into producing. It's people business, and the NHS is suffering from a neglect over many years of the people business aspect of management, and from the misunderstanding in one government after the other that they can use their power to command the NHS to efficiency. Now, this overestimation of power is a result of the excessive centralization of political power in the British system. And the result of that centralization is inevitably a command and control style of management. It just isn't possible to manage a country of 60+ million people from a few offices in Whitehall. When you try to do that, the only instrument left to you is to command, and you deny yourself the ability to persuade. In this case, the more power to the government, the less its ability to get things done. It's not about this or that government, it's systemic. It is not the NHS that needs to be reorganized, which is done again and again to disastrous effect. It is the system that manages the NHS and other public policies that need to be reorganized. It needs to be decentralized in respect for the powerful intervening agency of others.
Chris, as a participant in a governance system that sort of consistently produces misrule, what was your reaction to that?
I think Stein's absolutely right, that if you are exercising power about complex decisions, then you have to do so by mobilizing people and motivating people. And it's really a set of leadership skills which is quite similar to the problems that many people find actually running any big organization, which is that you actually need to get people on side and sharing the goals. Stein is absolutely right to quote what happened with the NHS And if you throw money at problem, particularly by raising lots of pay, the GP contract was a classic example of that under the last government, and at the same time, the subtext of your approach to throwing all that money at people is to say, well, actually, we don't really trust you. I would merely add that there's another category of issues which I think are a real problem in modern government, and that is where the problem doesn't sit in one handy box marked the Ministry of Defence, the Home Office, the Department of Energy and Climate Change, where they actually cut across. And there are lots and lots of problems like that. Complexity is tremendously challenging, and the people business, the more different people with different professional expertise are involved, the more important Stein's message about motivating them and getting them to share your organizational goals actually is.